In the wild heart of the Colorado frontier, a young woman is betrayed by the man she called father. Taken in the dead of night, she becomes the target of a secret meant to stay buried. But one rider follows the tracks into darkness, Elias Redfeather, an Apache tracker who refuses to let the truth die. Their fight for justice begins here. Dust drifted through Red Bluff the way unspoken truths drift through a troubled household, slow, persistent, impossible to ignore. The evening light bled into gold along the canyon walls, and the wind carried the faint smell of mesquite and old timber toward Judge Silas Whitlock's sprawling estate. Elias Redfeather stood at the edge of the property, one boot braced against the rail of the post fence, the other sinking slightly into the dry earth. He had returned from the border trails only an hour earlier, yet rest felt impossible. Something in the air pressed against his ribs, as if warning him of a shift he could not yet name. Inside the house, laughter rose and fell like a badly tuned fiddle. Piano notes floated through the open windows, soft, elegant, utterly indifferent to the weight of the night. Tonight was Ada Whitlock's engagement supper, a grand affair arranged by a man who understood alliances better than affection. Elias watched the lantern sway on the porch beams, casting warm circles over polished wood and white columns. He could imagine the scene inside: Ada's forced smile, Warren Pike's stiff posture, the judge's pride disguised as hospitality. The sort of evening meant to impress, not to celebrate. Elias had worked for Silas Whitlock for 9 years, long enough to know that loyalty was merely currency to the judge. He had been everything the man required: a tracker, a fixer, a silent witness to things better left unspoken. Yet he had never once been invited through the front door, never asked to sit at a table where lies were dressed as fine conversation. To the guests inside, he was just an Apache hired for his skill, not his humanity. To the judge, he was a useful shadow. To Ada, he wasn't sure what he was. He saw her briefly through the window when the curtains shifted. She stood near the far wall, a glass in hand, her posture straight but hollow. Her engagement dress was pale blue, delicate, beautiful, yet completely wrong for the girl he remembered. The celebration inside the Whitlock estate dragged well past midnight, but the laughter had turned thin, the music dull, the night exhausted. Elias Redfeather sat on the edge of his bunkhouse cot, washing trail dust from his arms in a tin basin. The water swirled into muddy spirals, carrying away the day but not the unease that had lodged itself beneath his ribs. He listened to the faint hum of the party dying down, the distant whinny of horses in the corral, the creak of the wind against the stable doors. Everything felt almost normal, until it didn't. A sound broke the quiet. A dull thud. Then another. A muffled cry swallowed before it fully formed. Elias froze, hands still dripping above the basin. He had spent years learning to hear danger before it announced itself, and this sound, this wrongness, made every instinct sharpen at once. In a single motion, he grabbed the knife from the side table and stepped into the cool night air. The estate lay under a thin moon, pale light tracing the white columns, the silent porch, the empty yard. Too still. Too staged. Even the wind felt like it was holding its breath. Elias moved along the side of the house, steps silent, senses stretched thin as wire. Near the servants' entrance, the door hung slightly ajar. That alone was enough to make his pulse tighten. Whitlock's help never left anything open. Then he saw it. The trail. Boot tracks pressed into the dirt, fresh, sharp-edged. Drag marks. Scattered scuffs. A struggle. Elias knelt, fingertips grazing the disturbed soil. 3 riders. One smaller pair of prints, barely steady. Ada. She must have fought, but not enough. They had taken her quickly. No wasted movement. No warning. Whoever did this had confidence, maybe even permission. A scrap of torn fabric fluttered from a thorn bush nearby, pale blue silk catching the moonlight. Ada's dress. Elias closed his fist around the cloth, jaw tightening. The realization was cold, deliberate, merciless. This was no random kidnapping. Elias rode hard into the night, following the trail with a precision most men would have called impossible. But he had grown up tracking ghosts through riverbeds and deserts, reading the earth as if it breathed. The hoofprints led him across shallow ridges, over dry washes, and through thickets of mesquite that clawed at his sleeves. The moon hung cold above him, a silver blade cutting through the dark. By dawn the land began to rise, shaping itself into narrow paths hemmed by sandstone spires. Ghosts slowed near a soft bend where the ground dipped into an abandoned creek bed. Elias dismounted and crouched beside a cluster of prints. 3 horses, one riderless. A smaller set of footprints staggered near the creek's edge. Ada had stumbled here, maybe resisted, maybe fell. A broken branch caught on a fragment of blue silk confirmed she was still alive when they passed. Elias pressed his palm against the earth, feeling the faint warmth of recent passage. The men were no more than an hour ahead. He tethered Ghost in the shade of a jutting bluff and continued on foot, moving quietly, breathing steady. The canyon tightened into a narrow throat, walls rising high on both sides. He smelled smoke before he heard the voices, muted, echoing off stone. Laughter. A grunt. A sharp curse. Elias slipped behind a cluster of brush and saw it. An old mine entrance, half collapsed, partially hidden by jagged rock. A place men chose when they wanted to vanish from the world. Inside, someone snarled, "Hold her still, damn it!" Another man laughed. "Girls got no sense left to scream." Elias's vision narrowed to a single point. He didn't wait. He burst through the brush silently, the knife already in his hand. The first man never had time to draw. Elias drove the blade beneath his ribs, twisted once, and let the body collapse into the dust. The second man lurched for a shotgun, but Elias struck him with the force of a falling boulder, one punch to the jaw, another to the throat. The sun climbed slowly over the sandstone cliffs, warming the narrow arroyo where Elias and Ada had taken refuge. For the first time since he'd pulled her from the mine, the world around them fell briefly still. The fire from the night before had collapsed into pale ash. Ada stirred beneath Elias's coat, pain tightening her jaw as she sat up. Yet her eyes, though tired, were clearer than they had been in days. Elias stood near the bluff's edge, scanning the horizon, rifle resting loosely against his leg. His movements were quiet, but the tension in his shoulders betrayed the weight of what hunted them. Ada approached slowly, holding the coat tighter around herself. "You all right?" he asked without turning. "Sore," she admitted. "But alive." "You slept," he said. "That's good. I didn't dream," she added softly. "Maybe that's better." Elias rekindled the fire with a few dry twigs. "Your body shut down what it didn't need. That's not weakness." Ada watched him for a long moment. "You speak like someone who's lived 2 lifetimes." He allowed himself a faint smile. "Feels like it some days." By mid-morning, they were back on horseback, Ada sitting behind him on Ghost. Her arms wrapped around his waist, not out of fear now, but necessity. The trail wound along a narrow ridge overlooking Red Bluff, the town appearing small beneath the white spire of its church. Elias pointed toward the western outskirts. "We're not going into town," he said. "But there's someone nearby I trust." "Mostly." Ada said nothing, though the word mostly didn't comfort her. Still, she held on as they rode downhill through mesquite thickets and dry gullies until they reached a weathered cabin perched above the town. Smoke drifted lazily from its chimney. Inside the cabin, the sharp scent of tobacco and old paper hung in the air. Maps lined the walls, and a stovepipe crackled with heat. Elias called out, "Abram?" A moment later, a grizzled man stepped out from a side room. Abram Holt, lean. Night fell thick and moonless over the Whitlock estate, turning every shadow into a threat. Elias and Ada rode silently along the back trails, keeping far from the main road. The house loomed in the distance, its white walls dimly lit by a handful of lanterns left burning inside. Most of the staff had been dismissed after the engagement supper. The judge liked privacy when discussing business best left unheard. Elias tied Ghost beneath the ridge and motioned for Ada to follow him low through the tall grass. They moved like two figures cut from the same silence, breath tight, steps deliberate. At the rear servant's door, Ada hesitated, memories pressing into her ribs. Elias touched her shoulder. "You ready?" "No," she whispered. "But I'm going." Inside, the hall smelled of whiskey, cigar smoke, and polished wood. The study door stood cracked open. Elias slipped inside first, checking each corner with the practiced ease of someone who'd survived by caution alone. The room was just as Ada remembered, shelves of thick legal volumes, a portrait of Silas above the mantel, papers arranged with obsessive order. Elias knelt and pulled back the heavy rug. Beneath it lay a hidden floorboard, faintly marked from years of use. Ada dropped beside him, hands trembling but steady enough to help pry it open. The iron-bound safe gleamed in the lantern glow. "Do you know the combination?" Elias whispered. Ada closed her eyes, recalling the rhythmic click she'd heard through the study door as a child. 1865. The year he bought his judge's robe. She turned the dial. A soft click. The lock surrendered. Inside were stacks of land deeds, envelopes thick with cash, and, at the bottom, a small black ledger bound in cracked leather. Elias opened it, and the truth spilled out in ink: bribery sums, forged signatures, illegal land claims, payments to mercenaries, and notes written in Silas Whitlock's precise hand. Ada reached in and retrieved a folded page. Her breath hitched. They rode into the night with the fire at their backs, the Whitlock estate burning like a dying star behind them. Elias kept Ghost low among the trees, weaving through roots and brush as shouts faded in the distance. Ada clung to him tightly, the black ledger pressed to her chest, its weight heavier than iron. Ahead lay darkness, uncertainty, and a sliver of hope so thin it could have been smoke. They didn't stop until dawn touched the mesa with pale gold. Near the ruins of an abandoned ranch house, Elias dismounted and nearly collapsed against Ghost's flank. Ada slid down after him, eyes widening when she saw his coat soaked in a spreading stain of red. "You're bleeding," she said. "It's not bad," Elias muttered. But the tremor in his hand betrayed the lie. Inside the half-collapsed barn, dust drifted through broken slats as Ada tore strips from her dress and soaked them with the whiskey she'd found in an old saddle flask. Elias gritted his teeth as she cleaned the wound. He never flinched, but the muscle along his jaw jumped like a struck wire. "You should have told me," she said, pressing the bandage firmly. And worry you more? You nearly died. I've nearly died before, he replied, voice low. Just not all at once. She paused, hands trembling. You think that's funny? No, he said gently. Just true. For a while, they sat in silence, the barn creaking in the morning wind. Outside, ravens circled the ranch like dark omens. Elias leaned back against a bale of old hay, sweat beading across his brow, but his eyes stayed sharp. We can't stay here long, he said. The sheriff's men will follow the tracks. Ada lifted the ledger. Then we can't run aimlessly. We need someone who can expose this. There is someone, Elias said. A circuit judge in Santa Fe. Nathaniel Hargrove. Honest. Rare as a clean river. A week's ride? Ada asked. Less if we push hard. And you're wound? I'll manage. But she saw the pain behind his calm. Elias Redfeather was beat. By the third morning on the trail, the land had opened into wide stretches of rust-colored earth and broken mesas. The sun rose like a blade, sharp and unforgiving. Elias rode ahead, posture stiff from pain, but his eyes never stopped scanning the horizon. Ada rode behind him on a smaller bay mare, her newly earned pistol strapped at her hip, no longer hidden, no longer symbolic. She carried it like someone who intended to survive. They crossed into New Mexico territory by midday. The air shifted, lighter yet more dangerous, because there was no longer anything familiar to hide behind. Elias guided them through narrow gullies and dry washes, following game trails and instinct more than any map. The road to Santa Fe curved through a maze of canyons that swallowed sound and twisted distance. At noon, the trouble found them. 4 riders emerged over a ridge, descending fast, rifles raised. Their faces were masked with dirty bandanas, but their posture was unmistakable. These weren't lawmen, they lacked discipline. They were mercenaries. Bought, not deputized. A warning shot struck the dirt inches from Ada's mare. Elias pulled Ghost hard to the left, shouting, "Ride!" They bolted into the rocks, hooves striking sparks as they wove between sandstone pillars. Bullets ricocheted off stone. The canyon amplified each shot into thunder. Elias spotted a narrow rise where the rock dipped just enough to offer cover. "Dismount now!" he called. They slid from their saddles and scrambled behind the ledge. Ada pressed her back against the stone, breath sharp. "They followed us. They're not here for capture," Elias said darkly. "They don't care who they kill as long as the ledger disappears." Gunfire cracked above them, pebbles raining down. Ada reached for her pistol. Elias studied her for a moment. "You know how to shoot?" "No," she answered. "But I know how to aim." Elias shoved a spare rifle into her hands, whispering instructions. How to brace, how to breathe, how to why. Judge Nathaniel Hargrove's homestead sat quiet beneath the cottonwoods, the branches shivering in the late afternoon breeze. Elias and Ada arrived at dusk, their horses worn, their bodies bruised, but their purpose sharper than any blade. Hargrove greeted them on his porch, a thin man with silver hair, tired eyes, and the slow, deliberate movements of someone who had carried justice longer than it cared to be carried. Inside, Ada placed the black ledger onto his heavy oak table. Hargrove read for nearly an hour without speaking. Each turn of the page felt like another stone dropping into a deep well. When he finally closed the book, he looked at Ada, not with pity, but with respect. "This is corruption on a scale the territory cannot ignore. he said. Will you bring it to court? Ada asked. I will, he answered. But understand, truth does not win easily here. Whitlock has allies. Some in Santa Fe. Some beyond. Then I'll testify, she said. I'll speak every name. Elias watched her, seeing the fire that had replaced fear. But before Hargrove could answer, Elias stepped inside with grim news. They're here, he said. Sheriff Kellen and 4 riders. They followed our trail. Hargrove wasted no time. He armed 2 ranch hands, boarded the front gate, and readied the rifles. Ada and Elias packed the ledger pages into a canvas satchel. The air grew tense, thick with the metallic taste of coming violence. At twilight, the sound of hooves crawled across the property line. Slow, calculated, predatory. They're waiting for darkness, Elias said. Then we don't give them darkness, Hargrove replied, handing him a Winchester. Gunfire erupted first from the ridge, bullets thudding into adobe walls. A ranch hand returned fire, dropping 1 attacker. Dust exploded along the ground as the remaining riders circled the homestead like wolves. Inside the gate, Ada crouched low beside Elias, pistol drawn. You should stay behind cover, he told her. No, she said. If this. The valley where Elias and Ada settled was quiet, but quiet in the west was never a promise, only a pause. Weeks passed in a rhythm they had never known. Sunrise over cottonwoods, water drawn from the stream, the slow building of a life they had believed impossible. Ada learned to mend fences. Elias learned to accept the softness he'd spent years running from. But the frontier had long memory, and the past followed more trails than any map recorded. One evening, as the sun slipped behind the mesas, Elias was repairing the corral when he noticed the horses lift their heads all at once. Ears pricked, nostrils flaring. The kind of alert that had saved his life more times than luck ever had. Ada stepped out of the cabin, holding a pot of warm water. What is it? Elias didn't answer. He was already moving. He crouched behind the trough, eyes fixed on the ridge above their homestead. The fading light painted the rock crimson, but even in that dying glow he saw movement, something shifting, then stilling. Watching. A silhouette. One man. Too still to be a wanderer. Too patient to be harmless. Ada's expression tightened. Federal Marshal? No, Elias said. Marshal rides down the trail. This one came to listen. The figure soon disappeared from the ridge, melting into the darkness as cleanly as a breath leaving a dying fire. Pack the ledger, Elias said quietly. Ada froze. We gave the judge everything, she insisted. Not everything, Elias replied. We kept the original letters. Your mother's land deed. Her testimony. Someone knows. Ada swallowed hard. She had dared to believe safety existed. Now the valley felt smaller, the shadows sharper. Later that night, as the stars glittered over the desert, a knock came at their door. Soft. Controlled. Elias gripped his rifle and signaled Ada to stay behind him. The door opened to reveal a woman, lean, sunburned, dressed in a ranger's coat with no badge upon it. Her left hand rested near her holster, but not on it. Morning broke over the valley in muted gold, brushing across the cottonwoods and the small cabin that had become Elias and Ada's refuge. But dawn did not bring peace. It brought questions, too many for comfort. Rowan Tate stood outside beside her chestnut mare, tightening the saddle cinch with quick, practiced movements. She operated like a woman who had been running for years. Ada watched her through the open door, fingers curled around a cup of cooled coffee. "She hasn't said everything," she murmured. "She said enough," Elias replied, sharpening a hunting blade with steady hands. "Enough to know this isn't ending here." Rowan turned. "Rourke's men will reach this valley by tomorrow. Maybe sooner. He has riders watching old Whitlock allies, former deputies, even members of the courthouse. Your names will come up. Your location won't be far behind." Ada lowered her cup. "So we leave?" Rowan shook her head. "Not yet. Running now only delays them. You need leverage before you disappear." She reached into her saddlebag and tossed a folded map onto the table. Elias opened it. A web of ink lines traced across the desert. "Rail expansions," he said. "Not expansions," Rowan corrected. "Conquests." Ada leaned over the map. "All this is over land?" "Land and power," Rowan said. "Rourke wants to control the rail route stretching south toward the border. Your mother's land is the final piece he needs. But he can't make a legitimate claim while you're alive and holding the original deed." Elias's jaw tightened. "So he'll come for it. And for her." Rowan nodded. "I can get you both out of the territory, but only if we weaken him first. There's a supply post he uses, Ildridge Station. Looks abandoned, but it's where his mercenaries pick up payroll, ammunition, orders. If we hit it hard enough, he'll be forced to pull riders back." Ada listened, the weight in her chest shifting from fear to resolve. "You want to strike his supply line. I want to burn it," Rowan essayed. Rain chased them out of Dead Man's Pass, soaking their coats and turning the dirt beneath their horses into dark clay. Lightning split the sky in crooked white lines as Elias, Ada, and Rowan pushed eastward. The land opened into a barren stretch of desert scrub, the storm rolling behind them like a herd of angry spirits. Ada kept her mare steady, stealing glances at Elias. He rode hunched but controlled, his wounds stiffening with each mile. They crested a low hill and saw it below, a lone rail depot rising out of the darkness like an abandoned skeleton. Ildridge Station. A broken water tower leaned beside it, and a row of empty freight cars sat crooked on the tracks. No lights. No figures. No movement. Rowan narrowed her eyes. "Too quiet." Elias nodded. "Rourke's men wouldn't leave it empty. They're hiding, or they've already moved everything." Ada tightened her grip on the mare's reins. "Then we need to know which." They dismounted in the tall grass and approached on foot. The storm softened to a drizzle, letting silence settle over the station. Elias motioned them to split, Rowan toward the western crates, Ada and Elias to the depot door. Dust covered everything, yet the tracks in front were fresh. Elias pressed 2 fingers into the footprint nearest him, still warm. "They were here minutes ago," he whispered. Ada drew her pistol. Her breath was calm now, steady. She had changed more than she realized. Inside, the depot smelled of old wood and engine grease. Crates were stacked to the ceiling, some broken open. Ada stepped closer and lifted a lid. Inside lay dozens of wax-sealed envelopes, each marked with a sigil she recognized instantly. Her father's seal. "These are contracts," she breathed. "Land buys, bribes, transfer orders. Rourke's still using my father's name to push claims." Elias scanned the papers, jaw hardening. He's finishing what Silas started. A floorboard creaked. Rowan appeared in the doorway, rifle raised. Riders. 6 of them. Coming.